Hi, this is Rob Pierce from worshipbasics.com. Welcome to the second in my video series on how to podcast church services. In part 1 we covered recording, editing, and compressing audio. Part 2 will deal with posting the finished file online. Before we get into the technical details, let me pass along a quick warning. Just because your church purchases a license to reprint music and lyrics from CCLI doesn't mean you have the right to post musical recordings online. While many hymns are in the public domain, the majority of praise and worship choruses require a special license to record and publish them on the World Wide Web. If you intend to include music in your podcast, it is important that you spend the money to get the license to do it legally. I highly recommend that you only include the sermon in your podcast. Copyright restrictions aside, recordings of live performances never sound as good as versions done in recording studios. You are better off leaving the music out of your podcast. Most of the people who listen to church podcasts are only interested in the sermon. Including recordings of the entire service take up a huge amount of memory and will only frustrate your internet audience. After following the instructions in my first video in this series, you should already have a good quality, relatively small MP3 file for your podcast. There are a number of ways you can upload this file to the web for your podcast, but let's start with a church website. If your church doesn't have a website, you really should get one. The number of people who turn to the World Wide Web for information before they look anywhere else is increasing every year, and a presence on the web is becoming as important as the sign out front telling everyone the name of your church. A web page is a great way for potential visitors to check things out before they come. If they hear a great podcast on the church website that originated as a sermon from your pulpit, they are a lot more likely to drop by on a Sunday morning. If a member of your church takes care of the website for you, all you have to do is send them a copy of your MP3 file, and they should be able to upload it to your website and include a link that will allow visitors to your website to listen. If you are doing it yourself, you'll need an FTP program and web page editing software of your choice. I'll be using a free FTP program called CyberDuck, which is available at http://cyberduck.ch/. The web editor that I use is a Mac program called RapidWeaver, but the process is similar for any FTP or editing program. I'm assuming that you already have edited the publishing settings on your FTP and web editing programs. Both of these programs will need 4 bits of information before they can publish your website: your server name, username, password, and path to your website. Make sure they are set up properly, or this will just be an exercise in frustration. To upload your podcast, launch your FTP program. You can see that CyberDuck is already connected to my church website and that I have created a special directory for podcasts. All I have to do from here is drag and drop my MP3 file into the podcasting directory listed in CyberDuck. Even with a compressed MP3 file, this is going to take a while. While we're waiting, let me take a moment to convince you of the convenience of choosing file names that make sense and are consistent. File names for our podcasts are just the dates using underscores instead of backslashes, since servers don't allow backslashes in file names. It makes it easy for me to keep track of files this way. You don't have to do it this way, but you are way better off picking a naming convention and being consistent with it. As you can see, CyberDuck is still uploading the file. This would be a great time for a time-lapse transition. The FTP program has finally finished uploading our podcast file, which took a pretty long time in spite of the MP3 compression. This is another good incentive to only include the sermon in your podcast. It would have taken much longer if I included the entire service. Since I know the name and location where I stored the file, it is easy to create a link to it using my web page editing program. I simply type a title for the podcast into the editor, highlight it, and create a link using this little button. When it prompts me for the URL, I type in the full URL, including the website, podcast directory, and file name. RapidWeaver gives me the option to open the podcast in a new window, and I think that's a great idea. That way visitors can minimize it and keep listening while they browse the rest of the church website. A click on the Publish button will upload the changes. Since the large audio file has already been uploaded in advance, it should publish pretty quickly and give me the delightful all finished chime. If I visit the church website and browse to a podcast page, you can see what it looks like and we can give it a listen. And it should sound just fine. The process may seem long and involved, but once you have done it a few times, it doesn't take long at all. Compressing and uploading the file are the most time-consuming parts of the process, and even they hardly take longer than 5 minutes, at least if you have a broadband connection. It isn't uncommon for me to have the sermon that I recorded at the 9:30 service uploaded to our website before our pastor finishes preaching it over again at the 11 o'clock service. I should mention that even though I have a link listed on a podcasting page in my web editor, I am not really taking full advantage of the features of this program. If I wanted to, I could assign categories to the podcasts or have it create automatic archives by month. I decided to avoid this in favor of deleting old sermons after a few months. I do have an RSS feed enabled on the page, but few people will actually take advantage of it. Now that your podcast is on the web, you can include it in other places besides your church website. An obvious choice is iTunes, which makes your podcast available for anyone to easily download and play on iPods and a wide range of other mobile devices. Setting that up takes a little more work and is beyond the scope of this tutorial, but if you're interested, I could at least point you in the right direction. The Apple website gives a very good directions on how to make your podcast file available to iTunes by way of an RSS feed. www.apple.com/iTunes/podcasts/specshtml has all of the information that you need on the process. There are also a number of hosting services that will do it for you for a modest fee, of course. But as I said, it's a little too involved for the purposes of this video. I hope that you find this podcasting tutorial helpful and that it encourages you to get the message from your pulpit out into the World Wide Web. Keep your Taper CD ministry going for a few more years, but don't be surprised if podcasts eventually take it over completely. In the end, it's quicker, cheaper, and more convenient. It's a great service for current members of your congregation and may very well encourage internet visitors to join you on Sunday morning as well.